In July of 1981, over 40,000 desperate residents of Banjul found themselves without a single drop of clean drinking water as political violence tore the Gambian capital apart. A single loom, operated by a woman history almost completely forgot, became the blueprint for survival that kept hundreds of families alive. When the bullets began to fly across the coastal avenues of Banjul, no one was looking at the textile stalls of the Albert market, and certainly no one was paying attention to the quiet, methodical work of Bintou Bala. Yet, inside a cramped workshop where the rhythmic clacking of wooden shuttles usually produced vibrant indigo-dyed grand boubous, a quiet transformation was taking place. Bintou was not making clothes today. She was engineering the literal difference between life and death. How does an artisanal weaver, trained in the ancient rhythms of West African clothmaking, suddenly outmaneuver a humanitarian crisis and build an improvised water storage network that baffled international relief agencies? To find out, we have to step back into the humid, politically charged streets of 1970s and 1980s Gambia, a nation caught in the turbulent wake of post-colonial readjustment. To understand Bintou Bala and the world she navigated, we must first understand the sensory tapestry of Banjul in the 1970s. The city, sitting on St. Mary's Island where the Gambia River empties into the Atlantic Ocean, was a dense, bustling mosaic of colonial architecture, corrugated tin roofs, and narrow sandy lanes that absorbed the tropical heat. It smelled of roasting peanuts, burning mangrove wood, salt air, and damp earth. In the bustling heart of the city stood the Albert Market, a labyrinth of stalls where merchants sold everything from imported European manufactured goods to intricate, hand-woven fabrics that told the stories of families, lineages, and ethnic identities through their patterns. Weaving in Gambia was, and is, a deeply sacred and communal act. Traditionally dominated by men working on narrow strip-weaving looms, the broader textile economy relied heavily on women master artisans who specialized in spinning, dyeing, and the complex repurposing of fabrics. Bintou Bala was one of these master craftspeople. Born in the late 1940s, Bintou had spent her entire life with threads between her fingers. She knew the tensile strength of hand-spun cotton, the specific weight of imported Manchester cottons, and, most importantly, the dense, waterproof qualities achieved when heavy fabrics were treated with local natural gums, starches, and resins. Her hands were permanently stained with the deep blue of indigo and the rust hues of kola nut dye, proof of a lifetime spent transforming raw agricultural products into wearable art. But by the late 1970s, the economic realities of Gambia were shifting rapidly. Following its independence from Great Britain in 1965, the nation led by Prime Minister, and later President, Dawda Jawara, enjoyed a reputation as a stable democracy in a volatile region. However, stability on paper rarely matched the daily struggles of ordinary citizens. Global economic shocks, rising fuel prices, and stagnant agricultural yields, particularly in the vital peanut export sector, began to squeeze urban workers and rural migrants alike. Banjul swelled with people seeking work, leading to overcrowded neighborhoods, inadequate infrastructure, and a growing sense of disenfranchisement among the youth. Political tensions began to simmer. Underground opposition groups formed, fueled by frustrations over corruption, economic inequality, and the heavy-handed tactics of the paramilitary field force. For people like Bintou, politics was something you heard about on the radio or discussed over morning ataya tea, but the consequences always landed squarely on the backs of ordinary laborers and artisans. Her workshop in a side alley near the market was a sanctuary from this rising tide. Women would gather there not just to buy fabric, but to share news, pool their meager savings through traditional tontine systems, and support one another through hard times. It was a microeconomy of mutual aid, run entirely by women who understood that survival in the city required absolute solidarity. By 1980, the political atmosphere in Banjul had grown toxic. Rumors of coups, foreign interventions, and police crackdowns were the daily currency of the streets. Foreign tourists, who formed a growing part of the Gambian economy, began to cancel bookings. Basic goods became scarce. Yet, Bintou kept her loom moving. She believed, as many artisans do, that work is a form of resistance against chaos. If she could keep producing cloth, she could keep feeding her family and paying the school fees for her younger siblings and orphan nieces. Little did she know, the chaos was about to break down her front door. The turning point came in the early hours of July 30, 1981. While President Jawara was away in London attending the royal wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer, a leftist faction calling itself the National Revolutionary Council, led by a disgruntled former shopkeeper named Kukoy Samba Sanyang, launched a bloody coup d'état. Backed by elements of the paramilitary field force and disgruntled civilians, the rebels seized the radio station, declared a Marxist-Leninist revolution, and took key government buildings. What followed was a week of profound terror and confusion. Loyal security forces, trapped or hesitant, clashed with the insurgents in sporadic firefights across the city. Looting broke out as law and order collapsed entirely. More terrifying for the residents of Banjul was the immediate intervention of neighboring Senegal. Under a mutual defense pact, Senegalese troops crossed the border to crush the rebellion and restore President Jawara to power. Heavy artillery and infantry combat erupted in the streets. Residential neighborhoods became active war zones. Homes were caught in the crossfire, and stray bullets punched through corrugated tin roofs with terrifying frequency. Panic sent tens of thousands of residents fleeing from their homes. People grabbed whatever they could carry, a cooking pot, a sleeping mat, a child, and ran toward makeshift sanctuaries like mosques, schools, and open courtyards further away from the heavy fighting. Bintou's workshop, located in a relatively sturdy brick and mortar building, quickly became a magnet for displaced families. Within 24 hours, over 40 people, mostly women, children, and the elderly, were crammed into her compound, seeking safety behind its thick walls. At first, the immediate concern was physical safety from the bullets and shrapnel whistling overhead. But within 48 hours, a far more lethal enemy emerged: thirst. The city's municipal water supply, already fragile and intermittent in the best of times, was completely disabled when a stray mortar shell struck the main pumping station near the river. Electricity was cut off, meaning electric pumps failed. Water taps sputtered, hissed, and then fell silent across the entire city. In the blistering West African heat, dehydration sets in with terrifying speed, particularly for infants and the elderly. People tried to venture out to find water, but snipers and roving bands of armed youths made the streets a death trap. Several neighborhood residents were shot just trying to reach public standpipes that were now bone dry. Inside Bintou's crowded compound, the situation grew desperate by the second. Children began to cry for water, their lips cracking and parched. Mothers looked on in helpless agony. The traditional clay pots, known locally as canaras, were quickly emptied. They needed a massive volume of water storage to survive a siege of unknown length, but they had no containers, no plastic drums, and no metal tanks. Buying them was impossible. Even if shops had been open, money had lost its meaning in the smoke and fire of the coup. This is the precise moment when Bintou Bala's extraordinary grassroots ingenuity intersected with history. Standing in her workshop, surrounded by rolls of heavy, unbleached cotton canvas and materials she normally used for heavy-duty grain sacks and upholstery, she realized that the key to survival was right in front of her. She looked at the fabric not as something to be worn, but as an architectural medium. Bintou remembered an old technique passed down by her grandmother, a nomadic weaver from the eastern regions near the Senegal River. In times of extreme drought, her ancestors had constructed portable liquid containers out of densely woven plant fibers treated with specific organic seals. Could this ancient knowledge be scaled up to solve a modern urban humanitarian crisis? She had to try. Working rapidly by the harsh, flickering light of a single kerosene lamp, Bintou rallied the women in the compound. There was no time for hesitation. She organized an assembly line right there on the dusty floor. First, she selected the densest, heaviest cotton canvas available in her stock. Using heavy-duty sailmaker's needles and waxed thread, she and 3 other women began sewing massive, cylindrical bags, some nearly 6 feet tall and 4 feet in diameter. The seams had to be double-stitched, tight, and completely uniform to withstand the immense outward pressure of hundreds of gallons of water. While the sewing was underway, Bintou set up a second station to prepare the sealing compound. She knew that untreated cotton would simply absorb water and leak like a sieve. She needed a waterproof barrier, but she had no rubber, no plastic liners, and no synthetic resins. Instead, she turned to the local ecology. She dispatched a group of brave teenagers, who managed to slip out through a back wall during a lull in the fighting, to scavenge for specific natural ingredients: gum arabic harvested from local acacia trees, resin from mahogany bark, and unrefined beeswax from a nearby beekeeper's abandoned stall. Boiling these ingredients in large iron dye pots over a small charcoal brazier hidden in the courtyard, Bintou brewed a thick, viscous, amber-colored concoction. It smelled pungent, earthy, and sweet. Once the massive fabric cylinders were fully stitched, Bintou and her team hoisted them into position, placing them inside structural support frames made from discarded wooden shipping crates and old metal bed frames scavenged from the alleyways. Then came the critical test. Using buckets filled from a brackish, shallow groundwater well that some neighbors had managed to dig in a nearby backyard, they began pouring water into the fabric cisterns. Everyone held their breath. For the first few minutes, the water soaked into the outer layers of the canvas, causing the cotton fibers to swell dramatically, a crucial natural mechanical action that Bintou was banking on. As the fibers expanded, they locked together tighter and tighter, sealing the microscopic gaps between the threads. As the thick, hot waterproofing resin was painted onto the exterior and interior surfaces of the swollen canvas, it penetrated the pores, creating a flexible, impermeable membrane. Water pooled inside, rose to the brim, and held. It didn't leak a single drop. Cheers erupted in the compound, a sound of pure relief that cut through the distant crack of gunfire. Within days, Bintou's workshop had transformed into an improvised manufacturing hub for water security. Word spread through the whispered networks of the neighborhood. People from adjacent blocks risked their lives to crawl along alley walls, bringing scraps of fabric, old sails, and canvas tents to Bintou's door. Day and night, fueled by adrenaline and very little food, Bintou and her makeshift team produced over 30 large-scale water cisterns. These improvised tanks were distributed across mosques, school courtyards, and family compounds throughout the western district of Banjul. These cisterns did something extraordinary. They kept people hydrated and alive during the most volatile week of the crisis, preventing the outbreak of deadly waterborne diseases like cholera and dysentery that so often accompany civil conflict and the breakdown of sanitation. By the time Loyalist forces, backed by Senegalese military intervention, fully secured Banjul in mid-August 1981 at a cost of several hundred lives, the immediate public health catastrophe that international observers feared had been remarkably averted in Bintou's sector of the city. Weeks later, when international relief agencies, including the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the Red Cross, finally arrived to assess the damage and distribute aid, they were astounded by what they found. Foreign aid workers walked through neighborhoods expecting to document widespread dehydration and water scarcity, only to discover rows of stable, functional, fabric-walled water cisterns standing proudly in courtyards. Intrigued, relief workers traced the design back to its source. A team of UN sanitation engineers visited Bintou Bala's workshop in September 1981. They examined the cisterns with professional awe, taking detailed measurements, notes, and photographs of the stitching patterns and the organic resin mixture. An internal UNHCR field report from late 1981 explicitly noted the indigenous technical innovation deployed by local artisans in Banjul, highlighting how traditional textile crafting techniques had successfully filled a critical humanitarian gap where modern logistical supply chains had utterly failed. Yet, despite this formal documentation in international archives, Bintou's name did not make the history books. When the official histories of the 1981 Gambian coup were written, they focused almost exclusively on the geopolitics, the intervention of Senegal, the restoration of President Jawara, the constitutional amendments that followed, and the eventual creation of the short-lived Senegambia Confederation. The human infrastructure, the weavers, the mothers, the scavengers who kept a city alive from the inside out, was quietly edited out of the narrative, relegated to a footnote about local resilience. Bintou Bala returned to her normal life as soon as the markets reopened. She didn't seek fame, medals, or financial compensation. To her, what she did was simply what any human being with two hands and a heart would do for their neighbors. She washed the indigo and resin from her hands, picked up her wooden shuttle, and went back to weaving the vibrant cloths that dressed the weddings, naming ceremonies, and daily lives of the people of Banjul. She continued working at the Albert Market for decades, a quiet pillar of her community until her passing in the early 2000s, leaving behind a legacy known only to the families whose great-grandparents survived the thirst of 1981 because a master weaver understood the language of thread and water. History loves to record the names of generals, presidents, and revolutionaries who break societies apart, but it so often forgets the quiet architects who stitched them back together. If these stories of ordinary human courage matter to you, consider subscribing, leaving a comment below with your own thoughts on the unsung heroes of history, and sharing this video so that Bintou Bala's name is never forgotten again. The next time you look at a piece of woven cloth, remember that thread is stronger than steel, and human ingenuity, born from the most ordinary hands, can hold back the rising tide of catastrophe.